Hello. My name is Jones, and today we are looking at forensic psychiatry, and this is part 2 of our presentation within forensic psychiatry. Within this lesson, we are looking at forensic psychiatry care of patients during detention, and we are also looking at correspondence during detention as some of the things that will be discussed within part 2 of this lesson. In Zambia, mentally disordered offenders are cared for under the Penal Code 87 and Prisons Act of the Zambian Constitution. Within the Penal Code, it states some elements to do with sanity, and also it states some elements to do with the responsibility or responsibility levels. So under sanity, there is presumption of sanity, then there is insanity. Then to do with responsibility levels, there is defense of diminished responsibility. Okay, so within the penal codes, what it states under presumption of sanity is that every person is presumed to be of sound mind and to have been of sound mind at any time which comes in question, until the contrary is proved. So when a person getting psychiatric treatment commits a serious offense while they are not documented legally that they are suffering from mental disorders, such a person is liable to persecution until proven mentally ill by qualified and registered psychiatrists. Okay, that is the first aspect of sanity, where there is presumption of sanity. So when one commits a crime, they are presumed to be of good mental state. And this can only be ruled out by a psychiatrist if there was no record documented that this person was mentally ill. So this person who has committed a crime without the actual element of sanity, okay, which is previously documented, will be presumed to be of sound mind. Then there is insanity. Under sanity, there is insanity. So a person is not criminally responsible for an act of omission if at the time of doing the act or making the omission, he is through any disease affecting his mind, or incapable of understanding what that person is doing, or of knowing that he ought not to do or act or make the omission. But a person may be criminally responsible for an act or omission although his mind is affected by disease, if such disease does not in fact produce upon his mind one or other of the effects that the patient may portray. Okay, as we have discussed necessarily within this lesson, if a person who commits a crime under insanity and the crime that is committed is not related to the insanity, then this person will be liable to defend or to persecution, okay, to defend him or herself in court of law. So, under insanity, the law states that a person is not criminally responsible for an act or omission if at the time of doing that act or making the omission, okay, this person is through any disease that affects his mind and or is incapable of understanding what he is doing, or knowing that he ought not to do that act or make that omission. Okay, so that is to do with insanity. So any crimes that are committed related to insanity, this person might just need admission in a forensic department. But if a person commits a crime not related to this insanity, okay, then this person will be criminally responsible for that act or omission. Okay, because it's not related to the disease that is affecting them. Okay, then there is a defense of diminished responsibility. Okay, that is to do with responsibility. What does the law states to do with responsibility? We have talked about what the law says about sanity. That is, there's presumption of sanity. Okay, and then there's insanity. Then there's the defense of diminished responsibility. Okay, here the law states that where a person kills or is a party to the killing of another, he shall not be convicted of murder if he was suffering from such abnormalities of the mind, whether arising from a condition of that they were arrested for, or retarded development of the mind, or any inherent causes, or is induced by the disease or injury, which has okay, here we can say which has substantially impaired his mental responsibility for his act or omission in doing or being part to the killing. Okay, so to do with responsibility here, the law states that the defense of diminished responsibility here, where a person may not be found to be criminally liable, is that when a person is part to the killing of another, and that is a killing of another, or they shall not be convicted of the murder if the disease that they are suffering from or the abnormality that they have, okay, is not making them have that perception to not get involved with that omission or that offense. So this is because the disease that they have has substantially impaired their mental responsibility. So this person has diminished mental responsibility. So they shall not be held accountable for the act of omission, any committing that crime or doing that crime, or necessarily being part of that crime. So this has to do with the diminished responsibility. So in diminished responsibility, these are people with impaired or diminished mental responsibility. They have an existing mental illness which can affect their perceptual judgment. So for such people, if they are found in the act or they are found to assist within the act, they may not be held liable, they may not be persecuted. But forensic psychiatry comes into play, as these people may require to be admitted for their own safety and the safety of the community. Okay, so we have looked at forensic psychiatric care of patients during detention, where there is presumption of sanity. Okay, presumption of sanity is like we are presuming that someone is okay at each and every time. This is necessarily what the law says, until proven guilty by prosecutor or proven to have a mental illness by the prosecutor. Then with insanity, a person cannot be criminally responsible for the act of omission if at that time of doing the act they had the act of omission, they had a mental illness that affected them. So you find that a lot of lawyers, they have, or if someone commits, let's say, a crime of passion, they talk of a post-traumatic stress that maybe the wife was facing and led them to kill their husband. So anyway, we don't want to go so much in those details, but otherwise, this is a lesson for education purpose. Okay, for education purpose, and it's not to make you a lawyer or forensic nurse, but you need just to understand that there are some laws that states, or the Penal Code of 87 of the Prison Act of Zambia Okay, it talks about sanity and responsibility. To do with sanity, there's presumption of sanity and there's insanity. Then there's do with responsibility, there's defense of diminished responsibility. Okay, now let us look at the correspondence during detention. Okay, we have looked at forensic psychiatric care during detention. Now, what are some of the correspondences that may happen during detention? Okay, so this one I can simplify it to you using the T-card mnemonic. So during detention, correspondence between the courts of law and the head of the psychiatry department is entered into concerning detention and care of patient using the T-card method. The T-card is just a mnemonic that I came up with necessarily to remember the correspondence that can happen during detention. So when the T-card is about the transfer order form, that is the T for the transfer order form. Okay, then the C is for the control order form. Okay, and that is what the C is about. Then A is for the adjudication order form. Okay, then R is for the court report or report from court. That is court report, the report that has to be taken to the court. So this is for court report or report. Then D is the detention order form. These will help us to give evidence in criminal proceeding of the patient, considering how dangerous they are, and a suitable sentence can be arrived at. So in detail, let us look at the T-card to do with the correspondence during detention. So A, we said, is adjudication order form. So the adjudication order form here we're saying is to hear and settle a case by judicial procedure. In the case of forensic patient, it means the patient has to be tried before a court of law, and it has to be determined whether they are guilty of a crime or not. However, before they can be tried, two psychiatrists have to examine and determine whether they are competent to stand trial or not. So the adjudication order form here, it is asking for the services of a psychiatrist to examine the mental readiness of the patient suspected to have a mental health illness to stand court proceeding or to stand before the law. So there is the adjudication order form. Then the control order form. This comes after an adjudication order has been made. Okay, so if you are successful with the adjudication order, then the court order forms comes in. Okay, the courts shall make a control order for the control care or detention of the patient, specifying that the patient be detained in prescribed place while his or her case undergoes judicial review. The patient may therefore be transferred from prison to a prescribed place, and in Zambia we have a prescribed place for people with mental illnesses. Okay, I'll not just mention it here, but otherwise in other presentation you might see that it will come out. Of course, is to avoid issues to do with stigma and the likes. But otherwise, in Zambia, we have a prescribed place where people with suspected mental illness can be transferred from prison to this mental health facility. Okay, then after adjudication order form comes the control order form. Then we have the detention order form. This is a form that restrains the client with mental illness to be admitted in a mental hospital for a minimum of 14 days, after which psychiatry personnel should finish a report to the magistrate about their finding concerning the patient. So the detention order form will allow psychiatrists within the minimum days of 14 to make a psychiatric assessment of an individual with a forensic psychiatry case. Okay, so Detention order form is a form that restrains the client with a mental illness to be admitted in a mental hospital for a minimum of 14 days. Okay, after which psychiatry personnel should finish a report to magistrates about their finding concerning the patient. Okay, then there is the court reports. Psychiatrists will provide a report of the patient's progress whilst in detention. Okay, so court reports are required by the prosecution, court, and also the lawyers. The report consists of a psychiatric assessment that should be objective and professional and should not be influenced by which side has made the request. The report should indicate whether the offender was mentally insane at the time of committing the crime or not. Okay, it should also indicate the competence of the mentally disordered offender to stand trial and whether he understands what he has been accused of, and also the meaning of pleading guilty or not guilty. Okay, so those are the court reports. The court report is prepared by the psychiatrist, and we are saying it should not be influenced by the person that ordered. So, in the court report, there is a format that is followed that indicates the competence of the mentally disordered person, and also it's going to state whether that person is able to stand before court, and if at all they understand the meaning of pleading guilty or not guilty. Then there can be giving of evidence in the criminal proceedings that is on the patient's dangerousness so that a suitable sentence may be made. Okay, then the other form that we talked about in the T card is the transfer order form. So this is a form that is used when transferring a patient with mental illness from one hospital to another. It has to be duly filled in by senior magistrate in the subordinate court. Okay, so to do with correspondence during detention, we start with a adjudication order form. The order is for the person with mental illness not to be admitted in the ordinary prison that is there, but be transferred to a prison for those that are mentally disturbed. Okay, so the education order form necessarily allows the assessment procedure or forensic assessment of the patient so that to see their suitability to be tried before court, and it has been determined whether they are guilty of the crime or not. However, they can be tried you can use two psychiatrists that have to examine and determine the competence of the patient to stand trial or not. So in the adjudication order form, we are just saying here we are just looking at the suitability of the patient to stand trial. Okay, that's in the adjudication order form, and this has to be done by two independent psychiatrists in the adjudication order form. Then in the control order form, here we have said it is coming after adjudication, so we are looking at the transfer of patient from an ordinary prison to a prescribed prison. Okay, so control order form, that's where the transfer happens. Okay, adjudication is assessment. Adjudication, here we are assessing the patient for judicial standing, if at all they can stand. Then the detention order form, it restrains the client with the mental illness to be admitted in mental hospital for a minimum of 14 days. So the patient is admitted for a minimum of 14 days, after which there is some psychiatry evaluation. Okay, after they do the psychiatric evaluation here of the patient, so within a minimum of 14 days, a report or court report shall be sent. So the next part is the court report. Okay, this will provide report of patient's progress whilst in detention. Then afterwards, the evidence will be given in a criminal proceeding on patient's dangerousness. And then there's a transfer order form, which is a form that is used when transferring a patient with mental illness from one hospital to another, and it should be duly filled in by senior magistrate in subordinate court. So with correspondence during a detention order, it starts with the adjudication, which is about assessment, control order, that is the transfer to prescribed facility, then the detention within 14 days, a court report written or by 2 independent psychiatry, then the court report, which would state the suitability of the patient and the evidence of criminal proceeding given. Then there's the transfer. So in this lesson, which is part 2, we have looked at forensic psychiatry care of patient during detention, and we have appreciated the Penal Code 87 and Prisons Act of Zambia, which looks at sanity and responsibility. What the law states about presumption of sanity, what the law states about insanity, and also what the law states about defense of diminished responsibility. Then we went on to look at the correspondence during detention. So the correspondence step starts with adjudication order form, after which comes control order forms, then detention order form, then the issue of court reports, then transfer order form. So it can be remembered, all these items in the T card. The T cards are the forms here necessarily that are within the mnemonics: the transfer order form, the control order form, the adjudication form, the court report, and the detention order form. So there is a format, or there is a system of which these forms can be given, starting with A, adjudication order form, C, control order form, then there's detention. So in the mnemonic, it is not necessarily arranged in that order. Within the mnemonics, it's not arranged according to the order in which these forms of correspondence can be done. But otherwise, if you want to remember that, it's ACDCT. If you want to remember according to the correspondence that happens during detention, you can use ACD, that is ACDCT. So that is necessarily what you can use. So from me, I'm saying from this part, for this part 2 of the lesson, we are done. We are going to look at part 3, where we'll look at treatment settings for mentally disordered offenders. We are going to look at treatment settings for mentally disordered offenders in part 3. So part 2, we have necessarily appreciated the forms that are there, and also what the Penal Code 87 of Prisons Act of Zambian Constitution necessarily what it states to do with sanity and responsibility, which starts with the presumption of sanity, insanity, then defense of diminished responsibility. Then within the correspondence, we have talked about ACDCT, which is adjudication order form, control order form, detention order form. Then CT, that is to do with court reports, and then the transfer order forms. So it's important you are acquainted within what happens within these areas to do with education order form, the control order forms, and detention order form. It's important you are acquainted if at all you want to major in forensic psychiatry. So I'm saying keep studying, and I'll see you in the last part, which is the forensic psychiatry part 3. Thank you.